such a blessing to have a place like this to sit and just smell the air and hear the creek and know that I'll fade into it at some point in my life. I'm 53 years old and was told about 5 weeks ago that I'm dying. I've been given about 6 to 8 months left to live, and that's really what's happening in my life at the moment. Being okay with dying is a weird place to be. It's very disconnected from most of the people I know. They don't get it. They think that I've given in.
It's still really hard for me to talk about it. I know that he's upset about dying and leaving his loved ones. But what's amazing is that he's so at peace with this journey that he's going through and where it's going to take him afterwards.
What keeps me non-agitated about death is appreciation for the life I've already had. I've had a beautiful marriage, and my kids are fabulous people, and they hold, fortunately, some of the best parts of me.
Have you had any experiences yourself that give you an insight into what happens when we die?
I've thought about death since the age of 6 years when my grandfather passed away suddenly. You know, it's taken me almost a lifetime to fully comprehend that death is an ongoing process that makes life possible. What makes the universe fresh is that it's dying and it's being reborn, and it's dying, being reborn. And every time it's reborn, it actually creates a better version of itself. And we call it evolution.
In the United States of America, I would say most people pretend that death doesn't exist. They call it a crime, they call it a mistake. They don't want to deal with it at all. And actually, death is our birthright. So to think of it in any other way is really just asking for misery and pain in your life, because everybody dies. Every form of life dies. What we call dies.
We came today because one of the Gibbons died recently, and Nico, the partner, is here, and apparently he's been in a kind of state of grief.
Nico had a mate that he lived with named Onyx, and they've been together since 1986, which is a very long time, it's 26 years. Gibbons in the wild are monogamous, so it's pretty common for them to have that pair bond. They tend to stick together. They're one of the very few primates that is monogamous. Most are not. Definitely that was hard for him. His activity level decreased pretty significantly. Gibbons in the wild will do this beautiful song every morning, and it's a duet between the bonded pair. And he stopped singing for several weeks. We're at about 8 or 9 weeks out now, and he's really starting to get back to normal, which is great. We're really happy to see that. You know, we're sad when animals die, but birth and death is all part of the same cycle. And you know, when leaves fall and decompose, it makes the soil richer. So you really do have to have all aspects of life and death to live on this beautiful planet that we live on.
Deep within us, for reasons that still strike me as quite mysterious, I think every organism knows how to die. Whether it's a deer that finally just relaxes in the mouth of the lion, or thinking myself about a rock climbing story, a fellow on El Capitan, 3,000 feet high, rappelled off the end of his rope. He forgot to tie a knot in the end of his rope, so he just came off the end of his rope and started falling. And people watching him told me that he started screaming and writhing in the air, trying to walk in the air, which he just cannot do. And then after a few seconds of that, just opened out. He relaxed and opened out as if he knew, you know, I don't want to spend the last 10 seconds of my life, because that's about how long it takes to fall, roughly. I don't want to spend that panicking and struggling and resisting. There's something in us that knows how to open out.
We've been doing research on the idea that consciousness may be something that is more than just the brain. It may involve the brain, but it may reach beyond the brain. For example, we've done a series of experiments that look at the possibility that one person's intention can influence another person's biology, their physiology, at a distance and with no sensory communication between the two people. This speaks to the idea that consciousness is more than just our physical being, and that in fact there may be ways in which consciousness transcends physicality. The implications of that for what happens when we die is that perhaps there's something more to our essence.
The event that changed my life was I was on my way to dinner one evening with my wife. We'd been married for 5 months. On our way to our favorite restaurant, a van crossed a stop sign at between 70 and 80 miles an hour. It broadsided our car and bulldozed us clear across Beverly Boulevard. The car took off and flew through the air and hit that tree in midair and came to rest in those bushes over there. That night, the doctors saved my life. I was at the deepest level of coma that they measure, a Glasgow Coma Scale 3. When I came out of the coma, pieces of memory started to come back. The memory from my coma came to me of a protector who was traveling with me through this inner space, through this journey into infinity. I was traveling through an ancient grove on a boat, and I could hear the sounds of rain pattering down on the cabin. And there was a person who was up on the deck, who I knew I would be safe if I could only just go up to be with her. And very slowly, in the middle of the night, it occurred to me who that protector was. And I realized it was my wife. And the following morning, my mother came to the hospital to explain that I hadn't always been in this room and in this bed. The reason I was in this room and in this bed was because I'd been in an accident. That before this room and this bed, I'd been a filmmaker, and that yes, I was married to Marcy, and that she had died instantly in the crash. And during my month in coma, she had been laid to rest in Phoenix, Arizona. So I lost everything, really, that mattered most to me. And that started this journey through consciousness to find what makes us who we are, could I recover who I was, and also to find a reason to go forward.
Tony Redhouse is a Native American practitioner from the Navajo tradition. His work with hospice patients and people in life transition connects him with the importance of living with the reality of death.
When you're laying in a hospice bed, you are going to look at your whole life, everything that you've created, and whether you have lived true to yourself or whether you have lived your whole life for the expectations of everybody else. My idea of life and death is focusing on the present. And what I've learned in this is that if I think about what it is right now that I really want to fulfill, what dream do I want to fulfill in my life right now, that I have the ability, the passion to do these things, the energy to do them. I'm going to do them right now.
I first got interested in doing this work really when I was an undergraduate, and I was at a small, very competitive university that half the student body graduated first or second in their high school classes. It also turned out to be the school that had the highest suicide rate in the country per capita, which wasn't in their course catalog. And the more I worried about doing well, the harder it became to study, and the harder it became to study, then the harder it became to do well. And I got into this vicious cycle where I literally couldn't sleep for a week straight. I remember sitting in physics class and I thought, you know, I'll just kill myself. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Like, that'll put an end to all this pain. Because I came so close to killing myself, that was my doorway. You know, I became about as close to doing that as you can do it without actually doing it. So naturally, I started to ask questions, what is death about? Is death, you know, just you kind of close your eyes and go to sleep, or is it something more than that?
We know that people have a lot of fear of death. How do you see this idea of death?
When the autumn comes, the leaves are brown and they fall, and where do they go? They go back into the soil. That nutrition of those leaves, which becomes like compost, goes into the roots and they come back and the new leaves are born again. So the old leaves, if they were afraid of dying, how the new leaves will come? We are members of the life force, and that life force continues. It's a dynamic life force. If we become static in one body and never die, and are afraid of dying, that means we are blocking the dynamic force, which is ever-changing, ever-evolving, ever-transforming life force. If we block that, the world will be a boring place.
Now, the real Robert Sheldon must answer your questions truthfully, and you will ask questions until you hear this signal. Who, in your opinion, is the real Robert Sheldon? And since you're so pretty there, let's start with Betsy Pop. Betsy?
Finally. Number one, what's the name of your nightclub?
The South of the Line.
The South.
South of the Line.
South.
South of the Line.
Number three, what's the name of the
When that incident happened and I swallowed the lighter fluid and got rushed to the hospital, what was the family thinking?
Oh, the terrible fear that we'd lose you. When you have someone sick like that, especially a child, there's a pallor over the whole house. You live a life, you go through the motions, but you don't enjoy things because we were so concerned. You could have died. You were so lucky.
When my son was 3 or 4, we were driving one night and it was a beautiful evening. And I said to him, look at that full moon. Isn't this a glorious night to be alive? And he said, what do you mean, Mommy? Do you think dead people can't see the full moon? And I thought, I guess not. I guess I think dead people can't see the full moon. And he said, oh, no, Mommy. He said, our friend Elizabeth, who had just died, she's up there and she's looking at the full moon and she's singing, enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. And so it was such a great reminder to me. Out of the mouth of babes comes this kind of wisdom that suggests that we are more than our physicality and that there may be possibilities beyond physical death.
Have you ever had anybody in your family or somebody you knew who died?
My cat died, and he'd been with me my whole life, and he died, so I was really sad.
What do you think happened to him when he died?
I believe he went to heaven and met other cats.
So is there a special cat heaven?
No, I think it's all the same, but they're just with each other.
Have you ever wondered about it?
I've wondered about what happens after death, but I've never figured out the answer.
Let's just stay with the topic for right now about death.
Mm-hmm.
So, you for it, against it?
I'm against it, man. The afterlife, I'm for it. I hope it's real. And, but again, like the paranormal, and the ESP or whatever, I just would be very surprised if it turned out there's some sort of afterlife. If there's not some scientific, natural way to explain where the pattern of me gets stored in some medium and carried on into the future, then the default position is that when you die, nothing happens. It's gone. You're in the same place you were before you were born, which is to say, nowhere. We're faced with that, sort of cold, hard reality, and I think that produces something, anxiety. For some people, anyway. It doesn't bother me, but I don't worry about it. But I know apparently a lot of people do.
So when you said that when you're dead, you're gone, there's nothing.
Well, near as I can tell, I don't know for sure. Nobody knows, but you know, the evidence is pretty overwhelming that that appears to be the case.
Dr. Rudy Tansey is a neuroscientist and does research on Alzheimer's disease at Harvard University. His views on consciousness and what happens after death are unconventional and provocative.
You know, a neuroscientist would tell you that your identity is just within your neural network, that everything you do and learn is just associated with what you already know. So then that leaves us with the question of when you die and the brain is gone, the electrical activity is turned off, is everything gone? The other side of the coin that most neuroscientists don't want to talk about is where is consciousness? Where are memories when you think about the past? Where were they stored? I mean, we don't have an answer for that in neuroscience. I ask students, I ask other professors this all the time. And they say, it's always hand waving. You know, it's in your neural network. I'm like, well, where exactly? Well, in the synapses. No, the synapses fire. It fires to recall the memory. But where's the actual memory? Where's my mother's face before I see it? What's the thumb drive of the brain that stores the JPEG of my mother's face? We have no idea.
I've been doing anesthesia for 38 years, and it's still amazing to me that we give a medication like propofol or have a patient breathe a gas like sevoflurane, and their consciousness goes away. What's missing primarily is consciousness. Other brain activities continue. So anesthesia is fairly specific, erasing consciousness and memory without affecting other brain activities. Now, how that works is still unknown. But the real question in anesthesia isn't so much why they go to sleep, but why they're awake in the first place. The prevalent theory is that the brain is a computer whose fundamental units, bits, are neurons firing or not firing. But neurons are far more complicated, not to mention being alive, and we don't really know what that is yet. If you consider a single cell paramecium, it's one cell, it swims around, it finds food, it finds a mate, it has sex, it can learn. If you suck it into a capillary tube, it escapes faster and faster each time. And yet it's only one cell. It doesn't have any synapses. It's not part of a network. So it, in and of itself, has at least cognition. I'm not saying it's conscious, but it performs intelligent activities. So I think it's an insult to neurons to say they're simple on-off states when a single cell paramecium is so clever.
We're asking very ancient questions that humans have been asking for hundreds, if not thousands of years. When we talk about death and dying, what's the nature of reality, ultimately?
We discovered that there is a part to reality that is beyond experience. It doesn't consist of things, it consists of forms. These forms are real even though you can't see them because they can actualize in the empirical world. Everything that you see is an actualization of a form in this background realm. So the nature of it is that of a potentiality. Potentiality is thought-like. Thoughts are in the mind. Is there a cosmic mind?
There are two views on consciousness that come from science. One is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain and therefore also an emergent property of evolution. That's the materialistic, reductionist view of science. There's another view that's creeping up now in some postmodern scientists, and this view is that consciousness is actually not an emergent property of evolution. In fact, evolution is driven by consciousness, that consciousness is non-local, it is transcendent, it's eternal, it's the ground state of the universe from where everything emerges, and being prior to time and transcendent, it is not subject to birth or death.
When we think about the evidence for what happens when we die, there's this idea that there's something about our consciousness that may transcend our physical being. We know that from a scientific point of view, people have looked at near death, out of body, reincarnation. These kinds of experiences actually can be documented and studied.
I'm trained as a hard scientist. My PhD is in pharmacology and toxicology. And when I was in graduate school, my mother committed suicide. And I had been a scientist for as long as I can remember. And so I looked to science. What does science have to say to these questions? What happens when we die? Where is she? Where did she go? Our main focus is the survival of consciousness. This thing that I call me, what happens to it when I'm no longer a physical body? I'm not associated with a physical body anymore. And so the primary way that we're looking at that is with the studying mediums, people who report regular communication with the deceased.
Many people believe that they can communicate with the dead. We call them mediums. So what we're doing in an experiment now is to take a high-density EEG recording of a medium as the medium is doing her work. We want to then study in the laboratory what is happening in the brains of mediums while they say they're in communication with a departed person. So we know from past experience that the mediums will be roughly 70% correct, which is way beyond chance. Where is the information coming from that a medium is getting when it turns out to be veridically correct? And we don't know the answer to that yet. But what we thought is that by using an EEG and looking at brain activity of the medium, that might give us a clue as to whether or not it is something like telepathy between the living or something else. If it's telepathy with the dead, well, that would be quite new and interesting.
I lost my sister 4 years ago, and I wrote a song for her. It's, Do You Remember Who You Are? And I wrote it for her. And I'm going to this psychic, and the first thing out of her mouth, I didn't say a word to her, was, oh, your sister, she loves her song. And I started to sob. You know, and this is that feeling again of connecting to that which never dies.
People have all kinds of experiences that kind of lie outside what we accept as truth or what is possible. I think that the kind of science that we're doing, which really looks at the powers and potentials of consciousness, helps to expand our sense of possibility. And more important, it allows us to ask questions that have been put down, that have been considered taboo.
A medium that we work with, a woman contacted her, and her aunt had died. And the aunt lived in Peru, and they had told her, your aunt died of stomach cancer. She went to a medium, and she wasn't getting stomach cancer. She was getting that the woman had been murdered, the aunt had been murdered. And she provided a first name, and she had lots of identifying information, and the personality came through very strongly. And the sitter took that information to the Peruvian government, and they exhumed the body, and they did another autopsy, and there was no evidence of cancer, but there was evidence that her trachea had been crushed. They found the name of the name the medium had given was the name of the person that had killed the aunt, and that person is currently serving in Peruvian jail for her murder.
When I was 15 years old, I was in a place where I shouldn't have been, with someone I shouldn't have been with, and we had a serious motorcycle accident involving a drunk driver. I remember watching my body tumbling through the air and landing on the roadway with a crash. Out-of-body experiences can't easily be explained by materialist science, and if it hadn't happened to me personally, I might not believe something like this was possible. Dr. Peter Fenwick is a distinguished neurophysiologist and senior lecturer at King's College London. His studies of death, near death, and out-of-body experiences provide interesting insight into what happens at the point of dying.
I was led to this work really by chance. I believed that there was nothing in near-death experiences. They were experiences which happened in California. They never crossed the sea to England. And so I thought that they probably were more imagination. Then a case came into my consulting room. He'd had a cardiac arrest, he'd had a near-death experience, and I knew that they were real.
I was sitting holding the telephone. Lightning came down the phone line. It hit me in the side of the head. It went down my spine. It welded the nails of the heels of my shoes to the nails in the floor. It threw me in the air, suspended me in the air, slammed me back down on the bed. It melted the phone. And I was burning and hurting so bad. Then all of a sudden I left out. and everything was cool. I looked down on the bed. I saw me on the bed. I saw Sandy come running down the hall. My friend who was on the other end of the phone heard the explosion. He came. He called the paramedics. The greatest thing that I discovered at that point was that, first, the place that I was between this world and the next, but I knew it better than any place I had ever been living in this physical life.
It looks as if when brain function is down, there is a set of experiences in which you leave your body and watch the resuscitation process. Now, what happens during this out-of-body process? Remember, no brain function, you've got a cardiac arrest, you're not breathing, all the brainstem reflexes have gone. So it is, in fact, a very good model for death itself.
I watched them load me in the ambulance. I watched the things that went on. I really didn't care because where I was floating above it was so much better than where I was when I was involved in it. And I was in the ambulance and the guy said, "He's gone. He's gone." And me, I thought, gone where? I'm here. The paramedics here. Where is anybody going? And I heard these chimes and I moved down this tunnel and come into this place of light. And I sensed an absolute sense of safety.
If it's true that you really do have experiences when the brain is not working, then it means the consciousness or mind, if you like, are in fact not the same as brain. It's a fundamental step.
I'm thinking actually about how this one moment changed my life. It ended my wife's life. And perhaps it's because what I've come to feel is that consciousness only knows one moment. It's the one moment that we all share and the one moment in which we live our whole lives. Our subconscious doesn't know the time of day. Our subconscious doesn't know the month. All our subconscious knows is now. And this one moment, this now, is what's still inside me and will always be within me. The most fully connected consciousness I'd ever experienced was at that borderline between life and death. I'll never forget the river of time flowing from the horizon towards me, from the future to the present. And at a certain point in my coma, I felt it stop. And the river of time ran still. I call it the moment when everything is now. And then I felt it flow in the other direction. Time was traveling away from me. And I felt very alone, because I realized at that moment that when something passes us into the past, it doesn't return. It would be gone. And I remember how I felt at that moment in my coma. And I remember how I understood that in some ways that was a moment of death and a moment of rebirth. I'm frozen at that moment, emotionally.
The Pam Reynolds case is one of the more dramatic near-death experience episodes. Pam Reynolds had a brain aneurysm, which is in a portion of the brain that was difficult to get to, and the surgeons were concerned that if they tried to get to it and they made an accident, that it could burst and she'd be dead before they'd be able to repair it. So they used a radical surgical method, which would require draining all the blood out of her head. When you do this, and the body is being cooled down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, eventually goes into shock and then cardiac arrest. So that's like one level of dead. You drain the blood out of the body, then the body is really dead. It's like double dead. And then they check by putting very loud clicks in both ears. You're wearing earphones that have very loud clicks that will make a brainstem response. They monitor that, and the brainstem response goes away. You're like triple dead. It's every form of dead that we know is dead. So she had a full-blown near-death experience.
And I remember the top of my head tingling, and I just sort of popped out of the top of my head. And I was then looking down at the body. I knew it was my body, but I didn't care.
She did say a couple of things that were unusual about the nature of the saw that was used to open her skull, and a certain sound that it made, and music that was being played during the surgery, and it turned out to be correct.
I had assumed that they were going to open the skull with a saw. I had heard the term saw, but what I saw looked a lot more like a drill than a saw. It even had little bits that were kept in this case.
One of the reasons to believe that her experience was unusual, at least, is that when you are going under general anesthetics, or if you're getting hypoxia, or all of the usual physiological shutdowns, your ability to have a clear thought very rapidly diminishes, and your ability to remember what happened also goes away.
I felt a presence. I sort of turned around to look at it, and that's when I saw the very tiny pinpoint of light, and I went toward the light. The closer I got to the light, I began to discern different figures, different people, and I distinctly heard my grandmother call me, and I immediately went to her, and it felt great. I asked if God was the light, and the answer was no, God is not the light. The light is what happens when God breathes. And I distinctly remember thinking, I'm standing in the breath of God.
So that's one of the more startling cases where the evidence that she was really dead was very good.
Many of the traditions in the world, their understanding is that when we die, that we go, and some say we go to a place of rest, a place of learning, that is not in the material sense, and that then we come back again in another form, or as a human being, or as another life form, and we have other kinds of experiences.
What do I think might be next? I think we get recycled. I think we come back into life for new and different experiences. The purpose or the meaning of that, I'm not going to pretend that I honestly know. I think we do sort of progress over time in our multiple lives. We change, we learn from these past lives, and we become, let's say, better, deeper, shinier. That's my belief structure. I'll try to let you know when I get to the other side. That's all I can say.
What happened before you were born? I mean, that's an important question too. Where were you before you showed up? In the end, we are all made of the same stuff. Earth, water, and air, which recycles as our body. Death affects the body, but not the spirit. The spirit recycles itself through the physical body.
For over 50 years, research has been conducted at the University of Virginia into cases of apparent reincarnation and the possible implications of our consciousness experiencing multiple lifetimes.
After 50 years of research now, we've got 2,500 cases in our files of young children who reported memories of previous lives. Several hundred of the cases have involved birthmarks or birth defects that match wounds on the body of the previous person. And some of them have also included written records where we know precisely exactly what the child said about the previous life, and then we can match that with the previous person that's been identified. One is a little boy named Sam Taylor. When he was about 1.5 years old, his dad was changing his diaper one day, and Sam looked up at him and said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diapers." But he kept saying this stuff. He kept saying, "I was grandpa, and I used to be big," and he came up with some pretty interesting details, like he talked about the grandfather's sister being murdered, and in fact, she had been killed some 60 years before, and his parents felt certain that he'd never heard about it. He also talked about his wife, which was his grandmother, but his wife from the past life, says some specific details, and then when she died when he was about 4.5, And his dad went out and collected belongings and so forth and came back with some family photos. So one night, Sam's mom had them spread out on the coffee table, just looking at the various pictures. Well, Sam walks over and starts pointing to pictures of his grandfather and saying, "That's me, that's me." And also a picture of it was his grandfather's first car, and there's no one in the car, but it's just a picture of the car, and he got very excited and said, "Hey, that's my car." So to test him, his mom showed him a picture of a class photo from elementary school and said, "Okay, well then show me where you are in the picture." And he ran his finger along the different faces and stopped at the one of his grandfather and said, "That's me." So that was one that has what we call recognition, where he was able to pick out his grandfather, and again, in a group photo. It's what we call a same family case, where a child is seeming to remember the life of a family member. Well, some people criticize the work simply by dismissing it out of hand, by saying reincarnation can't happen, so obviously there's no value to this work. But that's really not a very scientific, sort of scientism perhaps, but it's not a scientific view of letting your beliefs prejudice your view of the evidence, when it should, of course, be the other way around.
So have you had people in your life that died?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. All my parents are dead, all 4 of them. I had 2 bio parents, 2 step parents. Yep, so I've been all through that. So I drove them around to doctor's offices. I went through all that. It's, I'm sure my telomeres are much shorter from the stress of being a caretaker. Yeah, so that brings home the reality of death for sure. But they're gone. I mean, absolutely. I don't think they're anywhere else. Occasionally afterwards I thought I heard my mom's voice, that sort of thing. But, we all have these auditory hallucinations a little bit. Yeah. But then it went away shortly after that. So it's just part of growing up in the cycle of life, and I guess that's how I look at it. I just don't.
So you had this experience maybe that your mom did. You heard her voice.
Oh, I don't want to make a big thing about that. I just remember a couple of times in bed, sort of like late at night. You know how you're sort of falling asleep? It's just one of those transition things where your mind is producing all sorts of things. I don't think it's anything more than that. Anything more than the other hallucinations I've had from sleep deprivation, from sensory deprivation tanks. I've done all that stuff.
So my father, when he died, he was a typical man of his generation. Loving guy, but at a distance, you know what I mean? So he passed on, and around a week or 2 later, and I was in this very room one morning, and suddenly, one day, there he was. I was really almost overwhelmed with the unconditional love that I was experiencing from him, directly from him. I realized he was very close to me, very close in my space, too close. I had to just say, "Dad, just give me a little space here." So he did. The love was still there. None of that changed. But he was happy. He was kind of radiating happiness. And once in a while, I would ask him, in my mind, to question, what about this, what about that? And just get a few words, a few impressions, a few senses of what was going on for him. And then after, I think, about 2 days, maybe 3, that was it. Just moved on. I just said, okay, thanks. It's been good, Good luck, best wishes wherever you're heading. And thank you. I thank you for the time and particularly just that unconditional love.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? I mean, just life. I mean, take that breath. Let that body just extract that oxygen. Oxygen is a gas. We're keenly aware of consciousness. And we're aware of consciousness does not come from the body. We're aware of consciousness independent of the body. And so people are more aware that they are consciousness having a body rather than a body with consciousness. Because oftentimes people are actually very anxious about whether they're going to die, and they make decisions about their life, whether they're going to die. And in fact, that's not where we should be making decisions from. Our decisions and choices need to be made from, What gifts am I going to give before I leave here? What talents am I going to cultivate? How am I going to be a beneficial presence on the planet? And that's a much higher frequency than I'm afraid I'm going to die.
I think the structure of our society right now is a fear of death. And I mean, I hate to sound so blunt about this, but the whole anti-aging movement, you're a loser if you die. You're a loser if you get old. And yet somehow we all do. And our society has set it up that death and aging are the enemy, whereas they're inevitable. I truly know that I have no control when I live or die. So the combination of accepting a lack of control over my own death and a very deep gratitude for the life I've already had is my real reason for being at peace.
A lot of people have fear around death. And yet, here you were fighting in Korea and, you know, piloting crafts that took off from aircraft carriers and then having to land again in the middle of the ocean. You know, you've just described it like a needle in a haystack. And then getting on the Apollo 14 capsule after Apollo 13 almost was disastrous. Those actions imply a kind of fearlessness about death.
I've pondered my own immortality or mortality, but I think the more important thing for we humans is learn to feel pleasurable, happy, successful in what we do in this life and feel that we're being productive, caring and helpful to each other and to our families, that's really more important than whether we really have all the answers to what happens after this life. Living this life to its fullest and properly and happily, to me, is far more fundamental.
I got a call from my brother. I was living in Phoenix. My dad was in Tucson. He had taken a fall, and he was in ICU, and he was in a coma. And so when I left the house in Phoenix, I took two things with me. I took my drum, and I took 2 eagle feathers. And I went upstairs to the ICU room where my dad was at. And here I am, took my drum, 2 eagle feathers. My dad was like this. He was laying there with his eyes open and his hands like this. And I took an eagle feather and I put one in each hand. I placed one in each hand. And I took my drum and I wanted my dad to wake up. I wanted him to live because my mom and dad had been together 56 years. That was my intention when I came down. I want to see him wake up. I want him back with my mom. And so I put the eagle feathers in his hands and I took the drum and I created a heartbeat and I went from head to toe over his life. And I prayed over him. And I wanted him to be healed. And on the last beat, my dad went into a convulsion. And he closed his eyes and he released. When he did, he grabbed that eagle feather in his right hand and he closed his hand. And I knew that what I had done was what he wanted to have done. And when he grabbed that eagle feather, I knew that I had been sent to do what I was supposed to do.
We need to talk about death and the fear of death. I personally have more fear of an unfulfilled life than of death itself.
I know I'm afraid of death because I don't want to think a different way. I don't want to become a different person. I just want to stay who I am. If I change, I want to remember this form or this person.
Contemplating death can really bring us peace without impermanency. There's no change. There's no change, there's no life. Can you imagine a life without any change? Doesn't exist.
Death is a taboo to talk about. Just as when people don't want to talk about death because it's something that it happens to somebody else. But death doesn't know a culture, death doesn't know religion, death doesn't discriminate. That's the thing, is that it's going to happen to all of us. And we have to be prepared for it in any time, in any moment.
It's hard to watch the people I love suffer. And I have to say it's harder for them than it is for me because I'm not suffering with this. I suffer with physical discomfort. The pain is not fun. Pain sucks. But dying doesn't. Dying is just what we do.
I want to thank everyone for coming, for bringing your unique and special love for Lee here today. Lee was absolutely adamant that this was supposed to be a celebration of life, his and everyone else's year. And so with that in mind, we figured we'd turn the beginning over to Lee.
I want you gently to close your eyes and begin taking deep breaths in and out. Now start thinking of people you love, those that bring meaning to your life. Begin to feel the sense of appreciation in your body. Do you feel it in your chest, your stomach, your back? Continue to breathe deeply in and out. Now think of a place that you love to be, a place that brings you peace, and image yourself in that place. And now you're joined in that place by someone you really love. Allow them to sit with you. Look at their face. And in your mind, tell them how you feel about them.
Returning to the place we're born and raised can be an emotional experience. It is for me, because of family members who are now passed on. I took my son Skylar on pilgrimage to pay final respects to my mom and stepdad, who died 2 years earlier. My sisters arranged a memorial service and burial of their ashes in the family plot, a sweet goodbye for these two beautiful people who played such an important role in our lives.
And I'm watching the people that I love leave, and I am being left behind by the people that I love. And then I have to say the hardest sentence there is to say. I have to say, goodbye, I love you. How can it possibly be goodbye, I love you in one sentence together?
This is my mother. I lost her 2004. It's comforting to me that I can come and talk to her, be with her, bring her flowers, and just practice the way culturally we do in Mexico.
Clearly, the cross-cultural evidence suggests that people all over the world and throughout history have thought that consciousness is more than just our physical being. Different religions, different cultural groups have created practices to honor that transition.
many times when you see your friends that do get hit that are sitting beside you. I've had several pilots come out from under me, and the fear hits afterward. That's when you feel it. I was down twice, and you wonder why you make it and maybe the pilot didn't.
I joined the service in 1966, and I trained as a medic. And part of your training, they teach you not to care about your patients. It's a job, and that's all they want you to do is to do your job. But what happens is that when you have people, especially the men who are coming in off the field and have been mortally wounded and not expected to live, your own personal feelings start coming in, and you start caring. And there isn't any other way. It's, for me, it was just really, I just had to stop and just, right now I'm having to do this. It just really brings a tear to your eyes.
We honor the memory of those who gave their lives in the service of our country, and of those others who have dropped their burdens by the wayside of life.
Can people use art at the end of life, or people in grief, as a way of processing their emotions?
People have used art as a mode of expressing emotions, grief. Art is a mode of inquiry into consciousness. Now, the moment of death, it's known to have this experience of life review. That when you are going through this little passage in here, it's as if you're passing through all your experiences before you totally release.
When I first saw footage of elephants encountering the remains of another elephant, I was deeply moved. You could see that they were very interested, certainly curious. Were they grieving? Each member of the herd explored the remains using their sense of smell and touch, as if looking for clues about what happened, or in remembrance of events in the life of their departed companion.
You know, grieving is an important part of the process, and it's necessary. That's how we look at it with the zoo. An animal dies, but there are still other animals that are counting on us, and we need to continue to do our best to take care of those animals.
So if you have members of your congregation that are in grief, what do you do?
If I really want to quiet and be present with my heart and the grief in it, I'll walk the labyrinth. The labyrinth is a pattern, actually. It's usually about a 40-foot circle, and it has one path that starts at the outer edge and weaves in a very circuitous way, eventually into center. And what it is a walking meditation, where you find your natural pace. And that's pretty rare. By walking, the mind quiets much easier.
I know we are here to celebrate David's life, but I would not be honest if I didn't say that I'm grieving right now, and my heart is broken. I grieved over David as a brother would. Grief is something that you must go through. You must feel it, embody it, experience it, and it has a life cycle. It reaches a peak, and then it wanes, and then slowly dissipates as an energy. And when it dissipates, then you revive the bond, the love that was always there, okay? And then you have a relationship with that person. Mm-hmm. And that person, it doesn't have to be perceptually right in front of you. They're in your consciousness, and you have access to them anytime you want.
I think that everyone has their own way of getting through it. But once you have an awareness that life is eternal, you miss the person. I miss my mom. You miss them, but you have a different relationship because they're here. You know, they're around. And it just becomes a different relationship.
In the Christian tradition, you know, we've had many versions over the century of death and dying, but I think certainly the major tenet is that there is a life beyond, after the body, or after death. I do really truly understand that there's consciousness beyond death. There's consciousness beyond the body. And I think that's what we mean by soul. The soul really can awaken. We know that. It's often asleep for many people. And as we become more conscious of this part of ourselves, we really, I think, want to guard that, protect that, grow that, be in love with it.
This is a good subject because it's universal. Whether you're Christian or Buddhist or Muslim or atheist, everybody meets in that point we call it death. It says in that surah that Prophet, peace be upon him, was teaching. He said, blessed the one who created death and life. Usually you think life and death, and we call this life, and we call death the end, you know, this. But in that teaching, he calls this whole life death. And he calls the after death life. Because this one has a limit. You're born and you have an ending. The other one doesn't have an ending.
I think one of the great advantages of most traditional religions is that they make people less afraid of death. I mean, death's scary, especially if it's painful. But they make people less afraid of death because there's the feeling that death is a transition. If you're a materialist or an atheist and you believe that death is the end and the mind just goes blank, you may be scared of that or scared of growing old. I think that the main purpose of religion is to make people feel that their lives are part of something bigger than themselves, that they're connected to something much larger than themselves, and that includes something larger than themselves in relation to death.
If people choose a spiritual path, you know, whatever path that is for them, and only they know what's right for them, and stick with it, you get these direct experiences of, on one level, I'm separate, you know, you're you and I'm me, and another, I'm part of something larger that connects us all.
I think that the universe is becoming self-conscious through the human nervous system. The we that knows is an omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent being, the cosmic mind. And our mind is an aspect of that mind. As the great poet Rumi says, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the mighty ocean in the drop.
The Indian sages had this allegory of pots of water put in the sunlight. You take 1,000,000 pots and fill them with water, and the sun is shining. The sun is in each one of them, but there's only one sun. So, you know, you take 1,000,000 people, they all are conscious, there's only one consciousness.
What I know for sure about death is just a passageway, a doorway into ever unfolding of who and what we really are. And it's nothing to be afraid of. When the time comes, it's the common denominator that we all pass through. Know that one day we're not going to have this body. So while we're here in a human incarnation, we can ask, how can I serve? How can I love? How can I cultivate the gifts that are within me and express them? Let me not leave without saying and being and giving all that I can say and be and give while I'm here.
I know unequivocally, without any question, there is no such thing as death. No one ever dies. You just shift from one frequency into another frequency. And more importantly, you go back to where you originally came from.
So scientifically, we don't know if identity, self-awareness can survive death. That's more of a spiritual belief right now than a scientific belief. But I trust my intuition more than anything, and my intuition says, yes, this is probably the case.
Being aware that we are part of a continuum. We were here at the time of the Big Bang. I never died. From the time of Big Bang, I was here. And I will never die. I'll be here for the eternity. I only change form. The moment you realize that, then you are not afraid.
The dead are not under the earth, you know. They are in the water. They are in the woods. They are in the fire. They're in the air. They're in the breast of the woman. They're in the child that is crying. The dead are not dead.
The key to the conquest of death is to find out who you are. As long as you're confused with your body and your mind, you're bamboozled by a superstition, okay? Because the body and the mind are dying anyway all the time, okay? I don't have the same thoughts I had when I was a teenager. I don't have the same personality. I don't have the same emotions. If you have a string of beads, there's a thread that strings together the string of beads. So that you think of the beads as the memories and the string as what the memories are strung on. That's you, the string on which the memories are strung on. And if you can go to that deeper level and be grounded there now, you have conquered death. Because you realize that death is an illusion. It's actually the movement of space-time events.
In coma, it's a different universe. I had no sense of concern, no anxiety. I just found myself exploring. It was an area of complete curiosity. It was boundless, vista after vista after vista. Every environment was beautiful. One environment leading seamlessly to the next. The landscapes and places I visited, I knew them well, though I had never been to them before. The people I met, I felt I'd known them for as long as I could remember, although I'd not met them before, which is why I feel that we have one consciousness that we all share, and complete connection with everything and everyone. Very beautiful. And whether we recover, whether we wake up or not, there's no cause for fear when we change, when we move into some other existence.
On the day when death will knock at your door, what will you give to him? Oh, I will set before my guest the full vessel of my life. I will never let him go with empty hands. All the sweet vintage of all my autumn days and summer nights, all the earnings and gleanings of my busy life will I place before him at the close of my days. Now the day has dawned, and the lamp that lit my dark corner is out. A summons has come, and I'm ready for my journey.
sun comes up, I hear a cry. A baby's born, I see her eyes. We're made of grace and a wisp of stars. Do you remember